Was the wait worth it for the Google Pixel 6a?
And can Samsung finally make foldable phones happen? Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading tech journalists to dive into the big stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, joined as always by Adam Turner, a man who will one day get his dream of turning this into a supply chain podcast,
One day.
but not this day.
Right.
Adam, instead, we're talking phones this week, new desirable models and upcoming rumoured devices. But what do you reckon isn't on a smartphone right now that you'd like to see there one day?
I suspect I'd be shunned by society if I said a physical keyboard.
Yes, you would.
Yeah, right. So I'll go with my plan B, which is an invisibility cloak so no one can see me steal lettuce from the supermarket.
You have such mundane plans for an invisibility cloak.
Starting with the valuable resources and then maybe go to the bank and steal some money and gold and stuff like that.
Oh, my. We're also joined by a man who I suspect has Google tattoos for Google products that simply don't exist anymore. From EFTM, it's Dan Tyson. Dan, what should be built into a new smartphone that nobody's yet managed to pull off outside an invisibility cloak?
Look, I'm going to stick with my theory that an IR blaster is the be-all and end-all of good gadgets to have on a smartphone.
Oh, yeah, I might want to change my answer, actually. That's good.
It's been done, but they kind of, I think Huawei were the last ones to significantly offer them.
You still get them on Xiaomi phones in China and stuff, so they like that market, and I'm on board, man. Until they put it in a
Australia
smartwatch.
Who have a Xiaomi phone, that is.
Look, if someone wants to put it into a smartwatch, I think that would have been an even better idea. But look, I'll go with the phone.
Sounds like a plan. Samsung's made it official that it'll host one of its Galaxy Unpacked events on the 10th of August, and we'll be diving deep into what's expected to come out of the South Korean phone giant directly. But first, Samsung wouldn't have a phone business without Google's Android. And we've been spending some serious time with the company's latest smartphone, the Pixel 6a. Dan, the Pixel A phones, they've long been Google's value phones. They've generally been really good value too. But the Pixel 6a is coming to market at $749. Do you reckon it justifies that price point?
Look, we all know I'm a sucker for a Pixel, but I think they're pushing the friendship this year. I really think... just basically on the hardware alone, we're starting to stretch that friendship into, we've seen this before a few times, and it's time to change the dance. So,
what's the price difference compared to the normal 6?
So the normal 6 is $999.
Oh, it's $999.
It's $999. So there's a $250 price difference to the normal 6. But I guess, Dan, I think what you're getting at more is, because we didn't get the 5A here in Australia, that was US and Japan only. The 4A was, I think, around, from memory, this is going back a few years now, about $550, $600, I think.
It was,
and then the 4A 5G was in this kind of $749, $800 price range.
Yeah,
again, off the top of my head.
No, that's about right. That's my recollection anyway. But yeah, it's basically one of those things that, yeah, do you think they're pushing the price point a little high with the value of the dollar? I mean, we're getting all that sort of thing, so we've just got to sort of, is the hardware there? I mean, you've been using the phone, you guys, so what are the thoughts here?
So I like the fact that, and Dan, you won't necessarily appreciate this comparison, but I like the fact that they're doing an Apple in that the tensor processor that you get in the Pixel 6 or in the 6 Pro is in this phone, albeit with slightly less RAM on board. Obviously, more RAM would be better. But I like the fact that they've gone kind of flagship. I've certainly not hit too many big problems with it, outside the fact that one of the benchmarks that I standardly use flat out will not run on this thing, but I know how the tensor runs, so it should, and other benchmarks run very similarly to where the Pixel 6 sits. So I think it's a reasonably powerful phone for its $749. At least that's been my experience.
Is that what people want? Because an A series is always a question of compromise. That's the point. But if you make it close to as powerful as a normal one and bump up the price, have you missed the point?
Well, you got to make sure it actually runs everything, as Alex said.
True.
It basically tensor, it runs everything, it runs it smoothly. I mean, it's running less RAM than, say, the Pixel 6 and 6 Pro, but it still runs everything quite nicely. There's none of that jagged, like staggering when it loads apps into memory or anything like that you get with some of the other mid-range phones, even at this price point. But it is, under the hood, still an Exynos rebadge basically at this stage. So as Alex said, they're going for that siloed approach that Apple has with the bionic processors and things like that. But we're still in the very early stages. I mean, Apple's up to what, the A15? So 15 CPUs basically later. We're still at generation 1, and this is only the second time we've seen it. And it's still the same processor we saw in October last year when they launched the Pixel 6. So we're still really early days, but it still operates fairly nicely.
So if it operates nicely, where's your value problem with it, Dan? What is it that it doesn't do?
So we're looking into things like this. The OLED display only operates at 60 hertz. We're seeing a very common 90 hertz with a lot of manufacturers in an OLED at this sort of price point.
And quite a bit cheaper too, actually. You can get it
actually definitely seeing down the line. And if you want to go an LCD, you can get even a little cheaper there again. But the main thing that's sticking in my craw is the camera system, which we've basically seen this same 12 megapixel sensor since the Pixel 1.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I find myself a little bit torn on the cameras. You're not wrong. I think the cameras could be a bit better. And if camera is really important to you, then, and if almost that pro level camera is really important to you, actually, I've got to qualify that, then yeah, this probably isn't the phone for you. I think it does benefit, though, from all of that classically Pixel post-processing AI smarts. It's quite good low light. It's basically the Pixel 6 camera dialed down, and in fact, at the front, it is the Pixel 6 camera. And that was a decent enough unit, but I do know what you mean. You can get more flexible, you can get optical zoom and things like that at this price point from other makers.
It's really that, like, I mean, they've had the same sort of, I think they changed in the Pixel 3, the actual sensor they use, but they've essentially gotten to the point where that's it. Like, they're not really going to eke out anything more out of this sensor. Like, they have computationally photographied everything they possibly can out of this sensor. So it's getting to the point where they need to either up the sensor. I mean, they may have a bin of these that they're still just turfing them out just to get rid of the last little lines on this one. And next year we'll see something different. But it's really time to move on. Like, it's something like, even if you just jump up a little bit higher end, maybe go give a few more for the pixel binning to do something better. Like, just give us that little bit extra that we haven't seen for the last few years. And at this sort of price point, as you said, you can get that little bit extra in terms of the hardware, which I'd like to see what Google can then do with the software side of things. Because the Pixel is all about that what they can do with the software once you've taken a snap. And I'd like to see what they can do with a little bit more hardware on this mid-range sort of device.
I would think if you're a power user and you're not pushing all of the phone's advanced features, though, the camera is really where you're going to appreciate the differences. So therefore, the camera is maybe a smart place to put that difference between the 6 and the 6A, because that's where your average punter will notice the difference.
Certainly would offer you that's definitely great feedback, but it's more the fact that they've been using essentially the same sensor for all this time, and it really is time to move on because, as Alex said, you're getting more photo for your buck out of other manufacturers. You may not get the same results because Google is still very, very highly rated in the sort of pictures they're taking on this camera. But it is time to see what they can do with a little bit extra hardware.
One area that I was kind of impressed, and actually, Dan, I'd be interested in your feedback on this, was battery life. Because it's actually, by the standards of Androids, just staying on the Android side of the fence for the minute, it's actually got a fairly small battery. It's like 4410 milliamp, where nearly everyone is doing 5,000 milliamp hours. And I came into that thinking, oh, that plus the Tensor, and it's an Exynos. I didn't have a lot of faith in it, but it's genuinely surprised me. I guess the one benefit of having that slower refresh rate screen is it's, at least in my testing, it seems to just sip at that battery.
I mean, I've been getting a full 24 hours, like full 24 hours, and I have been using it, like hammering it full for the last week, and it's been getting that full 24 hours, no problem at all. And in fact, going a couple of hours over that with no issue whatsoever. So yeah, I'm pretty impressed with how it's going in terms of battery. Like, that's great. I mean, I did turn on the extreme battery saver, which gets you up to 3 days battery life. But it's sort of like using a phone with your hands dipped in a block of cement.
Yeah, totally. And that's very much your emergency scenario. But I think it's one area where, especially compared to the iPhone SE 2022, which is the same price, more powerful because that A15 does walk all over the tensor, but its battery life, you'd be lucky to get like 8 hours out of that thing. This is
Google,
way better.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's one of those things that Google probably has really tuned it for in terms of one of those spec features that they really want to get, and they can actually put that advertising out there, because a lot of companies will say, oh, it's a full day battery, and yeah, you might get there if you're lucky on some of these phones, but I've had no issue at all getting a full day battery life out of it. And as I said, a few hours extra if I need to. And if you wanted to throw on that extreme battery saver with, say, 20% to go, you will get some pretty good life out of it if you just need to, say, wait for that phone call to come in.
As you say, keeping the screen down to 60 hertz means it's not refreshing the screen as often, so it's saving on power. That's something that, as we said, a lot of sub $500 phones from the likes of Motorola and stuff are talking about 90, 120 hertz. Is this something that your average punter cares about? Your average punter cares about battery life. Your average punter cares about camera quality. They're talking about this like your average person cares about it, but does your average person really even know the difference or understand what this is all about?
Not really, but they would appreciate a cheaper price point. So if you're going to put a 60 hertz display in, you could probably shave a few extra dollars off to sort of match that down to make the average punter a little bit more attracted to this sort of device. So it's sort of one of those things that you can do it one way or the other. But I mean, most people aren't going to notice the difference when they're playing their Candy Crush or something like that it's a little bit faster, or if scrolling around in the UI, that maybe it's a little bit smoother. But they certainly will notice a $50 off.
I think it's a bit like that difference of saying to people, look at this 1080p TV, look at this 4K TV from a distance.
Now turn off motion smoothing.
Yeah, totally. But if you're totally used to a higher res display, you start looking at something low res and you really do pick that difference. But until you've lived with one of these devices with a faster refresh rate, you're not going to spot it. And because 60 hertz has been the standard, of course, there's a lot of people out there who wouldn't necessarily pick that big difference. I guess the other thing is that this is about as close as we get to a smaller, I'm not going to say small, but a smaller Android phone with plenty of power. Dan, do you think that's important?
Yeah, I mean, it's that thing that where Google comes in, that they basically own the Android operating system, so they tune the hell out of this thing to just operate smoothly. And that was one of the things I really like about the Pixels, is they really do operate smoothly. So it doesn't have to have that big, like 12 gig of RAM to really run smoothly. It's just for those power users, that's where you go for your 12 gig of RAM. This one, sure, it'll run everything that most people want to run. Your average punter, not going to notice the 60 hertz display. But they do notice if they take $50 off. But if you keep it up at that price and, say, added in more camera, you could do a little bit better. So it's sort of pushing the friendship in that sort of respect, but also holding your hand to where, or holding the standard to where it's been for the last couple of years. So it's in that sort of rough area where it's really pushing up against what do the other competitors in this sort of price range have.
Well, what are those competitors? I mean, if you had $750 in your pocket right now and you had to go buy a phone, what would you be looking for? What kind of brands and makes would you compare this against?
You can sort of look at something like the Galaxy S21 FE, and even if you had an extra $50, you can sort of get some good deals on like the Moto Edge Pro 30 and stuff like that, which come with wireless charging, better resolution, bigger cameras, and all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of competition you're up against. But for me, it all really comes back down to the software experience that Google gives. I mean, you've got that, say, 3 updates of the OS. You've got the 4 years of security updates. It's really sort of, or is it 5 years?
I think it's 5.
Yeah, I think it could be 5. But yeah, that's where you're getting it. And you also get those Pixel feature drops, because every month Google delivers their security update, but they also put in a little bit of extra something that some months can be like a wallpaper, but other months it might be like improved night sight on Snapchat, or it might be a better widget or something like that. Or they even dropped in things like live captioning on phone calls in one of their updates. So that's some bonus features that can be really cool to get.
Well, I mean, in terms of bonus features, one of the things that they didn't add that's in the 6 but not the 6A is the whole motion long exposure thing and the camera.
Mm.
And I've got to say, that just feels to me like they're just saying, yeah, look, we could do this, but we won't.
It wasn't one of those features that you sort of see used much. I mean, you tend to find people go and download a specific camera to do that with, like the Pro camera and stuff like that.
Well, maybe not, but it's a pixel feature. It's a tensor feature. You know, that's the way they sold it, that they could do it because of the of what they could leverage out of the tensor. And this is sitting in, you know, the same kind of ballpark, but it's not there. That my inner cynic suggests in 6 months they'll suddenly go, oh yeah, motion now with the 6A.
Yeah, it's could be one of those feature drops. I mean, they improved night sight for some of the apps. Like as I said, they did it for the Snapchat at one stage, so they could, as you said, drop it in there when they need to.
So if there's one thing you could change, one thing where you think they've really missed the mark on the 6A, either by including it or not including it, what would it be?
Telephoto lens.
Is that expecting too much for an A, though?
Yes.
Yeah, because the 6 Pro is the only one that's got an optical telephoto lens. The 6 doesn't.
Yeah.
Right, so living in the real world then, living in the real world, what could this have realistically, could you have expected from this that you didn't get?
I mean, the thing for me is that refresh rate. I mean, you are going to drop your battery down, though, so it's a really fine line. Like, I really want the 90 hertz display for myself because I have used 120 hertz displays and things like that. And as Alex said, once you've seen it, it's hard to go back. So for me, that's where I'd be sort of looking at it. But for your average punter, it'd probably be a little bit more battery life. That'd be about the only other thing. Maybe go for the 2-day battery life out of a single charge rather than that. But when you first with a size like a phone like this, it's a compact size. It feels really nice in the hand. It's easy to sort of handle it one-handed. And if you go any bigger in the battery, you're either going to make it thicker, which makes it then heavier and a little bit less, or you make it taller or wider. And yeah, you're sort of messing with something that is really not what you want to do.
That kind of leans into, we've still got this dynamic, and it's on the Apple and on the Android sides of the fence as well, that your mid-range budget, whatever you want to call them, handsets tend to be physically smaller, have a smaller screen. And so that's frustrating if you want the Pro model but the smaller screen, or the other way around. But it also means smaller screen, smaller body, smaller battery. Is it time for them to be a bit more flexible about mixing and matching? I want a Pro, but I want the smaller size, or the other way around? Or is our old friend supply chain going to get in the way here?
Well, look, I've got a take on this, and I think Android actually does this better than Apple does in this space, because there's a bunch of like 6.5 inch or slightly bigger budget phones. I mean, things that are cheaper than this. You can get a bigger phone for less than the cost of a Pixel 6a if you just want that big screen experience. But you do start hitting those other trade-offs in terms of performance or battery life or what have you. So I think the sizing thing is not so much of an issue. There's just no getting around that battery life issue, though, that if you make a smaller phone, it just has less space to pack batteries in with current battery chemistry. And, you know, maybe in 10 years' time, if we've moved off lithium-ion batteries to other things, then that might change, that a dynamic might switch back to smaller phones. There's certainly, every single time I talk about a larger phone, someone will come along to me and say, but what I want is a really small, powerful phone. It's like, well, it can be powerful, but then the battery life will be measured in minutes.
And you also get, like with the Pixel 6a, you're also talking about it's only 18-watt fast charging. I use the air quotes around that, which really at this stage, I mean, you're talking about like Oppo and those companies using 65-watt smart charging, which is absolutely astonishing, getting your phone from 0 to 100 in about 45 minutes. And that's just amazing. Like, that's the sort of thing that you want. And when you sort of plug in an 18-watt charger and it takes 2 hours to charge fully, it's a little bit slow. But also when you're talking about that, you have to do things like splitting the battery to allow it to charge simultaneously to get that sort of fast charging. And again, that just makes bigger phones. So rocking a hard place time.
Now, there's no wireless charging here. Should that be standard, or do you think that's a fair compromise?
I think it's a fair compromise at this sort of end of the market. I'm not a huge proponent of wireless charging because I've always got a charger near me, and so I don't tend to have that. But it's certainly things that people do want. So I'm more than willing to accept that people do want that sort of thing. So Yeah, it's rocking a hard place, but wireless charging for me personally, no, but it is certainly very popular because they keep including it.
Yeah, look, I think at $749, it should be there. And the reason I say that is because that is leading up towards the top end of what I'd consider the mid-range, basically that kind of sub $1,000 price point. And the reality is you can go out now and buy, for example, any number of Galaxy S21 phones. So last year's flagship, they're all wireless charging compatible for this kind of price. There are phones out there that will do this at this kind of price. And as soon as you punch up not much further from this, it's just absolutely stock standard. I think Google could have included it, and it would have made more sense out of people who might have bought the Pixel stand, for example, because you throw and I've done this accidentally, you throw the 6A onto that, and it just kind of flashes and blinks at you and goes, what the hell is this?
Yeah,
it should have been there.
It matches like the Pixel Buds Pro, which are coming up as well, and they've got wireless charging on the charging case, so it would have been made a bit more sense. Like everything now we've announced is all wireless charging. It'll work with your Pixel stand too. Sort of sell your accessories as well. So I do agree in that respect. Yeah, it would have made a perfect sort of spec bump to add in. I'm not an engineer, so I can't speak to how much thicker the phone would be with a wireless charging coil, but I imagine there'd be some give there.
Well, the other challenge here, of course, for the 6A is that we know already that the Pixel 7 phones are coming, and probably fairly soon. Dan, do you reckon it would be smarter, given how the 6 and 6 Pro were really super affordable flagships, do you think it'd be smart to wait and see what they're like?
At this stage, yeah. I mean, we're probably talking about October for announcement, October, November for actually seeing them in the marketplace. So it's not that far off. Like, I mean, you're only talking about 3 months to wait for the next iteration, really. I mean, it's always been a bit of contention as to when Google do announce their phones. Like, there's always been a more of a push to get them earlier in the year to take advantage of the newer processors as they come out. And so is this shooting themselves in the foot by now having a Pixel coming out 3 months before their flagships, essentially? So, and as you said, those were affordable in the Pixel 6 series. If the Pixel 7 series is also affordable, it's only $250 jump up to, say, a Pixel 7 if it matches the pricing of the Pixel 6. And that's going to be a pretty hard thing to sort of go past.
So what do we want from a 7?
And what do we know?
No, nothing.
Invisibility cloak. Here comes my invisibility cloak.
I'm with the invisibility cloak. Let's get some banks and, well, actually, let's get the lettuce first. But, I mean, Pixel 7 very likely is going to have the next generation tensor. Again, it's basically rumored to be coming from an Exynos base. It's one of those things. Google's been hiring CPU engineers for years, so they've been sort of getting to the point where they can architect their own processors, and they'll be feeding that back into some of the Exynos stuff that Samsung's doing. They'll use their fabrication process and stuff like that, obviously. But when it comes down to everything else, I mean, I see that we're going to see a similar sort of camera platform as we saw on the Pixel 6 Pro, because they proved that they can improve that over the time. I mean, the Pixel to the Pixel 2, the camera on the Pixel 2 was just tuned to an absolute brilliant fine point. It was the Pixel that made the camera like the known feature for the Pixel series. So I see that sort of thing lasting. I see similar sort of specs, your 12 gigabytes RAM. They'll probably go up to a 512 in terms of space. Battery-wise, I hope we get a little bit extra because the battery life on that was a little bit average. And I really, really hope we get a fast charging.
So the hype train has started rolling with Samsung announcing a Galaxy Unpacked event coming late in the evening of the 10th of August, Australian time. Dan, most of the rumours seem to be around foldables, which is a market that Samsung's pretty dominant in. What are we expecting to see?
I mean, we're Galaxy Fold, Galaxy Flip, so we're on to the 4th generation, I think, of those, and that's basically just refining what we've seen. I mean, all the rumours are out there. I mean, the Fold, obviously the larger one, is the bigger thing is the internal S Pen capability and stuff like that. Will we see an update to the screen size on the front? I mean, previous one was about 6.2 inches or something, I think. Rumours are sort of all over the place there, but most seem to be pointing to a same size screen, but a thinner device, and also working on the fold in terms of the actual crease within the display itself. So that's one of the things we're sort of seeing with the Fold. The Flip, well, I guess we'll just have to see. I mean, that's the thing that we want is obviously bigger batteries. We want the same sort of form factor. I mean, when you hold the Flip, it's a really nice phone to play with, flip open and all that sort of stuff. I don't really want to see it get much thicker, but I'd love to see more battery life out of it.
I'd like to see some battery life out of it. I struggled with that thing. I really did.
Definitely fair. I mean, the other thing is, obviously, we've just been talking about it, cameras. Are we going to get better cameras? I mean, Samsung is really good on their camera tech. We've seen them produce all these nice new camera sensors. Are we actually going to get them in the Flip?
Now, remembering back to, was it last year they officially killed off the Note? And now, so is it the Fold or the Flip that's considered the replacement for the Note? Or either, depending on what you want to do with it?
The Fold or the S22 Ultra.
Yeah.
Are the Note replacements.
Yeah.
But
which is why the internal S Pen would make a lot of sense in the Fold.
Yeah, the weird thing the challenge they've got, and I know I've seen varying rumours which suggest, yes, we'll have an internal S Pen, a hole for it to sit in the same way you've got on the S22. Whether or not that comes to fruition. The other big challenge which we had with last year, and I wonder if it'll be the case for this year because they've got to accommodate that flexible folding screen, was that the S Pen for the Fold is specific to the Fold. You grab any other Note, you grab the S21 or the S22 Ultras, which can take an S Pen. You can throw any S Pen on there. Like I've got an S Pen kicking around. I think it's from like a Note 3, a really, really old S Pen. And it's fine. It says, yeah, this is an S Pen. I'll do all my S Pen stuff with it just fine. I tap on the screen of the Z Fold 3 and it says, no, you can't use this one. It might scratch the screen. So it was actually specific to the Z Fold 3. You had to buy the model that would work with that. I wonder if that's still going to be a limitation in play.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things. Like, I mean, I feel bad. I only went back to the Note 8 for the S Pen that I tried. So definitely, I mean, everyone's got, well, just about everyone who's into phones or high-end phones has tried a Note at some stage and likely does have an old Note lying around they can grab an S Pen from. If they're going to have a garaged S Pen inside the Fold 4, though, do you need one lying around to actually do?
Yeah, totally fair. I say that because it wasn't included. Like it's not even included in the box with the Fold the Fold 3. You had to buy it separately, or you had to think, oh well, I've got one, except that actually wasn't going to work.
Yeah, so obviously, if they do include it, great, happy days. If they don't, we're again back to this problem of does it come with that specific S Pen only for the Fold series? In which case, we're just going to roll our eyes, sigh deeply, and grab that S Pen.
You mentioned the cameras as well, and it's a weird thing because when they announced the very first Galaxy Fold, it wasn't even Galaxy Z Fold at that point. When they announced the first one, it had the best cameras on any Samsung phone. It was beating out, was it the S10 that year, I think?
I think it was.
Yeah. But it was beating out the best of their S-series phones they'd already announced. But since then, the 2 and the 3 had cameras which were actually, with one exception, lower spec than what you could get on that year's S phones. The only area where they were actually arguably maybe better, or at least a bit more technology forward-looking, is that the Fold 3 is surprisingly still the only phone you can buy with an in-display camera. For that selfie camera on the actual unfolded thing, it's part of the screen. We've not seen that from anyone else yet. Samsung was actually way ahead of the curve in bringing that to market.
It is, but it's also had that funny grey gloss over that wasn't quite there, which we all hope if they can pull it off on the Fold 4, it'll be great. I mean, there's renders out there now of the phone, and you can't see it on the folded out display. You can sort of see it on the external one, which has it built into the bezel, but you definitely can't on the internal one, and that's hopefully a good sign. But I mean, obviously, all the renders have the black background, which don't really lend themselves to seeing that sort of grey area that we sort of saw. So I would love to see it. I really want to see the under-display camera really shine and come to the fore with a lot of different models, but it's always the tech that really holds us back every time. So we want to go there, but the reality often doesn't match it, and it comes down to what Samsung can pull off. And if anyone can do it, Samsung are probably the ones that are going to do it.
Well, that's the thing, though, because especially here in Australia, but even globally, this is a market that Samsung seems to own in terms of delivering consistent new, fresh models. Because what you've got, Motorola's sort of got the Razor, but they don't seem to be terribly serious about pushing it anywhere. You've got TCL are constantly talking up, oh yes, we've got foldables, but yeah, good luck buying one.
Mm-hmm.
Huawei
Huawei.
had theirs, but well, yeah,
Again,
Huawei.
Yeah.
I mean, Oppo has their sort of foldable, which is semi-available if you want to go through a few hoops. But again, it's those hoops that get in your way. It's, as you
Now,
said.
is this because not enough people want these things, or just because Samsung's done such a good job of it that no one else thinks they can compete?
I think that's basically one of the things. I mean, they really have nailed this whole thing. They've done the typical Samsung and shotgun the entire like form factor. They've gone with the flip and the fold form factors, which is the two popular ones. Yeah, I think they've just really scattergunned the market. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I think the other big factor there, though, is price.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the fact that they, even though, yes, the Fold 3 and the Flip 3 were less expensive than their predecessors, they were still seriously expensive. And this getting back to the camera thing, this is what sort of annoyed me, that these were the most expensive phones, especially the Fold 4, that Samsung made, and they didn't have the best cameras on them because obviously they spent all their money engineering the foldable form factor. I think that price point is the big thing that has really held this market back, because certainly I've seen a few more Flip 3s out in the wild than I ever saw of the earlier generations. Not so much with the folds though, and I think the cost is the big thing there.
I've actually seen so many folds using the Razer Kishi, like the gaming thing. I've seen about 3 now on public transport, and that sort of blew me away that these
I'm
people are
impressed they
using
could
it
get
now.
it to fit in the Kishi.
I'm assuming it was the Kishi and not the Backbone, the Android version of that. So, but yeah, seeing these things on these gaming controllers was just wild with this massive display. And it was like, okay, now I get it.
I tested out a Nikon Rig gaming controller with the Fold, and it's an amazing, luxurious way to play. It's quite fun, but totally ridiculous at the same time.
So if you're another phone maker and you want to out Samsung in this space, what do?
Make it cheaper.
Absolutely agree.
But then it's not going to be as good. Like, what else can you do?
Nail
Can
two
you
Pixel
innovate?
6A's together on a hinge.
Basically. Like, yeah. Is it
Hang on,
possible
Microsoft's listening.
yeah. Is it possible to out Samsung apart from price?
I mean, if you're going for a cheaper model, people are often willing to accept that little bit less in terms of quality spec and things like that. And at the moment, people know Samsung are the premium foldable phones, and they don't look too much at what the brand is. So if you just happen to pick up this cheaper, sort of not quite as good foldable phone, it's going to look good. It may not handle as good, but you're certainly going to have that little bit of cachet as you're wandering around with your foldable phone.
I think the other thing there, though, is you could potentially get away with it at a cheaper price point because Samsung's foldables have all had best of current gen processors in them for the most part. And not a lot of people actually need that much raw power. I mean, we've just been talking about with the Pixel 6 having the Tensor, but even the mid-range Snapdragons that you get in other competing mid-range phones, or the Exynos if you're Samsung itself, those are fine for the vast majority of people. They absolutely will do all your social media, all your web browsing, simple Android games, not a problem. So you could throw a lower spec processor into one of these things with a foldable form factor. That'll drop your price down. That'll also quite possibly improve your battery life. And you could have some very happy consumers out there.
I mean, it probably would also, without the computational photography that a lot of these phones rely on, it'd probably drop your camera quality in some of your pictures, of course. But, I mean, a lot of the people buying these things that would look at a cheaper foldable probably not as interested in the high-end photography stuff. So, yeah, that'd certainly be definitely a way to do it.
Now, this is a different strategy for Samsung because what you were just talking about sounded very Apple. Why should we make a cheap one when we can make a really fancy high-end one and we know people will pay for it? But then you look at the rest of the Samsung range and they've got a ridiculous number of phones at all different price points and sizes and all that kind of stuff. So anywhere else in Samsung, you can go, I want to spend roughly this much and I want roughly this much in return, but not here.
Yeah, it's been one of those things that it's still a nascent market that we're building on, and we're still we're we'll be 4 generations on in a week or two, and it's still that Samsung owns the market. I mean, no one's, as you said, Adam, no one's really game to enter into this arena, especially the Australian market. In China, it's a little bit of a different story, but around the Western world, it's really Samsung's game. So it comes down to what, as you said, can they do?
Well, then when will they hit us with a Fold 4A?
I don't think they will. I honestly don't think we'll see a cheap Fold. We'll just see a gradual erosion of price to the point where it just starts making sense to go, well, if I'm paying a premium phone contract or if I'm buying a premium phone, I can either have the standard phone form factor or I can have the foldable form factor with slightly different specs or less battery or, different compromises in play. But I don't think Samsung are the ones who are going to do that. I think, and this is, again, bringing TCL back into the discussion, every single time they've demoed stuff, and I've said, right, well, when will an actual physical device exist that I can buy? They've said, when the market's ready for it and when we can do it at the right price. And for them, that's more affordability. That's a different brand bringing it in. I think that's where we'll see it. I don't think we'll see it from Samsung anytime soon because, frankly, why should they?
They really are owning the market sort of that high end. And it took Galaxy S7, that sort of before the A series, which is their real mid-range, came into became good. Before then, it was quite frankly a pretty crap sort of brand. But these days, Galaxy A series was fantastic.
Galaxy J phones.
Yeah, don't. You want to trigger PTSD. But yeah, I mean, so I reckon, we're a good few generations before we do see the Galaxy A series sort of Fold or whichever letter they assign to sort of their cheaper Fold sort of series. So at this stage, they're probably just making hay while the sun shines, and people are paying the price. They've opened up the pre-orders today and offering Samsung Galaxy Care packages if you pre-register. It's not a pre-order; it's a pre-registration. So they're going to gauge the interest that way, and I think it's still a lot of people signing up for these sort of interest in these devices. And until that sort of starts waning, do
you think anyone in Cupertino is eyeing off this market?
I think for sure. I mean, they just want to see it.
There's no doubt that they will have prototyped this kind of stuff.
For sure,
they will have looked at what can
but I mean
be
more
done.
than that. Yeah.
I mean, our supply chain expert can probably tell us all about the... But yeah, I mean, I agree. They're probably prototyping the absolute hell out of it. But we all know, Apple does tend to like to have an idea of what they're doing and how it works. And at the moment, Samsung, the Fold and the Flip, still have a few niggles with the sort of layouts. And
this